The BSP sees inflation settling at 5.5% this year. Let's crunch now the latest numbers with economist John Paolo Rivera, who joins us now from General Santos. Thank you so much for joining us, John. Are we encouraged by this inflation rate of 4.9% in October from 6.1% the previous month?
Well, this is a great development for inflation, and we are seeing that supply constraints have been improving and that prices are slowly stabilizing as we approach the holiday season.
All right. The big problem last month, John, was rice inflation at 17%. And we've seen that number settle into the lower double digits. Even vegetables and fish prices have subsided. Is this an indication now that rising prices have been tamed for good?
Well, the reduction or the slowdown in inflation is actually driven by the fact that it's already harvest season and rice that we have ordered abroad has already arrived in the country, augmenting the supply of rice in our country, thereby reducing the price. However, we still have to watch out for our supply side constraints so that we are able to maintain that the price of rice would be stable until year end.
You mentioned about that key word, supply constraints. Are we likely to have that problem in the month of November and December?
I think, again, as what PSA has mentioned earlier, holding the supply constraints constant, we are not expected to have these constraints as December approaches because, again, the import that has arrived might be or may be sufficient until December given the increased demand due to the holiday season. But unless any other natural calamity would exist, I think we're on the good track.
If you look at the flip side, there were slight upticks in clothing, footwear, housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels. Could this potentially also be an aberration?
Well, this is actually an increase in demand for these products, especially now that Filipino consumers are into higher spending as the holiday season approaches, particularly on clothing, wherein we keep on buying this, stocking up until December.
All right. If you look at the numbers now, 4.9%. And we saw the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas raise the cost of borrowing or raise interest rates by 1/4 of a point in a surprise move, in between meetings. So with 4.9%, John, are you saying then there's no case at all for the BSP to hike rates yet again from the current 6.5% to 6.75%?
Well, I would have to agree with that the BSP would most likely be holding the rates since we have seen inflation is slowing down. However, BSP would remain to be hawkish in a sense that in case inflation would start to tick up again, it would prompt them to increase rates further by the end of the year or even in the first quarter of 2024, given that inflation might speed up again.
All right, you are in General Santos. You're spending the week there. What is the sentiment of our kababayans there regarding rising prices?
Well, rising prices here in the provinces are actually managed because relative to urban areas, particularly the National Capital Region, prices in the provinces are relatively lower. Inflation is quite slower, and the commodities here are very accessible to everyone.
So are you saying then in General Santos, the rising inflation rate is much slower compared to the urban areas? And if so, by how much is the rise of prices there?
I think that the increase in prices in the provincial urban areas is slightly slower than the National Capital Region, given that a lot of demand, the market dynamics are happening in NCR.
Mm-hmm. But domestically, the problem with rice supply, John, and higher prices also lies with the big private traders. You have rice cartels, hoarders, and smugglers. And according to some people I spoke with over the weekend, they are the problem and not the supply. So could this be addressed seriously by the new Agricultural Secretary, Chu Laurel?
Well, it is a challenge for the new agriculture secretary because combating these rice hoarders is a very tough task. Number one is to spot where are they, where is their supply of rice, and how do we penalize them so that they are not able to alter the supply of rice in our country. And it has been a problem for a long period of time, finding them, penalizing them, and stopping totally this rice hoarding by law, or legally
But
stopping
John,
this.
let me put everything into context. Our new president, Bongbong Marcos, has 31 million supporters behind him. A lot of people are saying he has the political will to find these rice cartels, hoarders, and smugglers. He had the biggest margin of victory in any election. Do you think that he has to really put his foot down and find these hoarders, smugglers, and rice cartels that control prices?
Well, he can, of course, now with the powers that's endowed to him, with his capacity, with the margin, he can actually find them easily. However, again, locating this all over the country is a very tough challenge, especially if these rice hoarders are not willing to show up.
All right. I'm sure they will show up, and many others there will be able to point a finger on who they are. What is on your wish list for the new Agriculture Secretary so commodity prices could be more affordable for our kababayans?
Well, for the new agricultural secretary, I've been an advocate of modernizing our agriculture sector. Maybe the new agriculture secretary can find ways, no? Find funds in order to infuse new technology to modernize our agriculture sector, reduce it from being to subsistence and move towards modernization and commercialization so that it is able to guarantee supply regardless of any calamity that might hit the agriculture
And
sector.
he, of course, just said yesterday that it is not feasible for the president's ambition, no, during his campaign for 20 pesos per kilo of rice during his administration. All right, briefly, the July to September GDP numbers, economic data will be out this Thursday. What is your forecast? Could the economy weaken even further from the 4.3% GDP growth in the second quarter?
Well, my forecast for the third quarter GDP is at 5.5%, and this growth rate in our GDP is actually driven by the effects of the recent rate hikes of the BSP that actually constrained consumption and investment. It's much slower, but it is actually growing because it is fueled by consumption, private and government. It is also fueled by the fact that we are approaching the latter part of the year. The holiday season is a
Uh-huh.
period wherein GDP is experiencing faster growth.
What about for inflation? What is your target for November and December? Will it be lower than the 4.9%?
Well, for November and December, I'm seeing an inflation stabilizing at around 4.5 to 5%, given the recent trends that we have and that supply constraints have been slowly addressed.
Thank you so much for your insights on the inflation rate and on economic growth. John Paolo Rivera from Economist Advisory and Research.